Thank you very much. Can you hear me back there? That's fine. Good to see so many here. And I understand you are very ambitious because you are trying to aspire to go for study programs with this university. So I wish you the best of luck with that. It should be a great day for you. I will take up some of your time here by talking about something that you may or may not have heard about, which is called the Anthropocene. How many of you are familiar with that word, Anthropocene? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yes, but not a large majority. So in just a few moments, you will know something that you don't know now. So then we have at least achieved something today. So this is not me, but the names are about me and my colleagues and our students at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. That's the largest school of technology in Sweden, in fact in the Nordic countries. And that's of course mostly engineering, but there are also some economics, some social science, and also quite a large chunk of humanities now, which is mostly done where we are. And we have this collaboration for a long time, actually, with colleagues here in St. Petersburg. Julia Lyons is among them. Actually, this is from Naples in Italy. We run a waste management project there. It is very tough. You know, there is the mafia in southern Italy. So it's a challenging thing. Here, well, you recognize some people here, I suppose. And I think we can use these faces to signal that there are important, strong forces out there in the world now. It's a world full of tension, full of important events, important developments, but also not a very easy world to navigate in. And to the left, I think we can see an image that is fitting for a university. When there are big forces pushing and things can go quickly very bad, you need to learn, you need books, you need to study, and sometimes actually sit by and get the learning and get in the mode of collaboration, because learning makes you also, it makes it possible for you to learn. Now, let me see how this works now. I should, no, well. So here's the title, and this is another picture of the world, actually. You can choose for yourself whether you think the previous picture showed progress or whether this picture shows progress. This is the cover image of a magazine called Time. It was a couple of years ago, and personal freedom is growing in many parts of the world. And personally, I find this very progressive. But that is another reason for people to be fraught and divided. So it's a world where we need to navigate and find our ways. I would just like to spend half a minute to say a little bit about my own policy-related work. I'm an historian specializing in environmental history, just like Julia Lyons, and history of science, but also other strands of history. And many people think that maybe historians, they sit by themselves precisely like the previous image in a library full of books or papers and never come out. And maybe they invite a few students every now and then to speak to them, and then they send them out again to be in that library. That is a very false picture, actually. Many historians are out there speaking to politicians, speaking to business, providing arguments for the general discussion. Not everyone does that, but I am among those who do that. And this is something that the Swedish government introduced about a year ago, a new framework program for leaving CO2 emissions to try and fight climate change by 2045. And we are 8 experts from various fields and disciplines who are appointed by the government to assist the government and the parliament in this work. And here are the members. I wouldn't go into these people who they are, but just to see their faces. And for some reason, I was photographed on another occasion. So I'm standing out there. And as you can see from there, you can maybe decipher the names is energy policy, economics, climatology. Previous picture was, he's a geographer, political science again, and history for me, environmental history. And here are some of the people in the office. Just some images of how we're thinking about this. I wouldn't talk about this, it would be too much, but it's like that. And here is our remit. Again, I wouldn't give you any details, but the first point I would like to show you, we are 8 people charged with the task of actually evaluating what the government does in all fields of their governance. Because climate is such an issue that it actually links to everything. Whatever you do, it has some kind of ecological or climate effects, because you always use energy one way or the other. Schools do, transportation does, industry does, households do. So everything, whatever you touch upon in governance, it has some kind of climate implications. So our remit is enormously big, and it's very hard, I must tell you. We worked now for 1 year, and in March we're going to present our first comprehensive report, focusing actually on transportation particularly. And then we will see what happens. There is a lot of expectation about this. So, well, can you contribute from history? Yes, you can. We are all equal, the 8 people in this regard. So political science, economics, climatology, history, all fields are important to deal with these kinds of things. I realized I should have just skipped these images, actually. There are too many. Here's my talk. I will walk you through 3 stages of an argument about a new narrative that we would like to have to see for the world. And it builds very much on what I call a new view of the world, a new Weltanschauung that is being provided from science, basically, particularly something called the Earth System Sciences. And I will soon explain to you what that means. This implies also some thinking about social transformation, change that is necessary, for example, to meet CO2 targets. And also, what sort of expertise, what sort of learned people we need to deal with that. And that will also take us to the governance challenge. What might be the geopolitical implications of this new human-Earth relationship that we're talking about? So let's start with the Anthropocene. Here are a couple of just fresh images that I downloaded only the other day. A new film, actually, by these people you can see there. Maybe the most famous of these 3 people is Edward Bertinsky, a Canadian photographer and filmmaker. And actually, the narrator is another Swede, a little bit more famous than I am, actually. Alicia Vikander, now working mostly in Hollywood with films. You might have seen her in several movies. She is the narrator of this Anthropocene film. And this is sort of an Anthropocene image. Anthropocene is about humans making big impacts on the world, on the planet itself. It's often geological or geo-oriented pictures like this one. The second one here to the right is actually from Norilsk. And I chose that because it was in this country. But also because it's a little bit also the flavor of Anthropocene imagery. Visualizations about the Anthropocene is often about big things happening, a little bit ominous, a little bit strange, maybe a little bit dangerous, but also with hopes for change. So these are just a handful of the new books that are coming out these years. Have been coming out for some years and will keep pouring out, I think, often about, again, features in nature, changing nature. There to the left you see an element that I think is important here, namely ice, because ice is melting, and the melting of the ice is an indicator of what's happening to the planet with climate change. Here to the left is a person who is quite important for the Anthropocene. He's a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. His name is Paul Crutzen, And he launched this concept back in 2000, so soon 2 decades ago. So this is a fairly recent development. It has risen quickly as a concept. It was a meeting of scientists in Mexico where he said this. In fact, I wrote a book myself. This is in Swedish, actually. So I based what I say a little bit on that book, which was published last year. And again, with some ominous imagery, storm over the open sea. The meeting, up to the left there, you can see an abbreviation, IGBP, an acronym. This means the International Geosphere Biosphere Program, one of the large international research programs. This was started in 1985, and it builds actually on a concept that again has a Russian connection, namely the concept biosphere. Biosphere was launched in the 1920s by a Russian scientist, Vladimir Vernadsky, who was a biogeochemist, big fields, biogeochemist. He was a broad-thinking person, and he thought this little narrow zone of contact between the geosphere and the atmosphere, and where this thin film of vegetation and human activity takes place, that's a very crucial zone. So for this he invented the concept of the biosphere. The Russians were very keen to get this concept into the big programs already back in the early 70s, the first International Biosphere Program, but then turn into the IGBP. And this community of scientists that created these big programs are precisely the Earth system scientists that have been very instrumental in bringing this development forward. In this book that I mentioned to you, I make a big point of another Nobel laureate, contemporary actually with Vladimir Vernadsky, the American physicist Robert Millikan. You may have read in your school books in physics about Millikan. We shouldn't go into that now. We just want to take some interest in what he thought about the human capacity to alter the world. He said, you know, God created the world in such a way that humans cannot destroy it. Humans cannot destroy the world. He said literally in a book in 1930, we are powerless to do to God's creation any titanic physical damage. So just do whatever you like, the world will remain roughly the same. What was his argument actually for that? He was a physicist. Did he have a physics argument? Actually, no. He said, you know, God has provided his creation with foolproof mechanisms. Rest assured that you can do no harm to it. So it was a theological argument, surprisingly, to come from a physicist. He simply believed in God so much that he thought God must have catered to humanity in such a way. I have used the backdrop here, image from the Alberta tar sands, where they extract low-level oil from surface mining, basically. And the result is actually titanic physical damage. And there's lots of titanic physical damage that we do to the world, all over the place. And every school child now can say, very confidently, that this Nobel laureate, Millikan, was plain wrong. This is not true. We don't believe this anymore. So things have changed in a very major way in just a few generations. So these so-called hockey stick curves that you see on the right-hand side here, they really date from the early years of this century. So they are 15, 20 years old. The knowledge that is encapsulated in these curves is in fact older. It was not very surprising to hear in 2004 or 5 that the population is rising very quickly. Nor was it a surprise to hear that telephone calls are rising very quickly in numbers. Nor is it very surprising to hear that people travel much more than they did before. Or that the mangrove forests are receding or that the glaciers are melting, or that the biodiversity is going down because of extinctions, nor is it surprising that the number of McDonald's restaurants is going up. It's another curve in this collection of curves. You have fertilizer consumption, you have ozone depletion, you have great floods, you have coastal zone biochemistry. All these are indicators, both from nature and from society, to demonstrate that something is going on right now since the middle of the previous century, about 70 years ago. Things started to change very rapidly after the Second World War. And this upward curve in all these dimensions, and you could do many, many more actually, is called now the Great Acceleration. It's a great acceleration of, you could say, human civilization. That is very clearly linked to the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene, anthropos meaning human in Greek, human impact on the geological scale is driven by all these changes. And we can look at these curves in some detail, just to, if you didn't see it clearly, again, of course, it's also tourism, it's transportation, as I said, urban, cities are growing very quickly, and if you just then move a little bit upward in thinking here, scaling a little bit upward, you can also say that this is, what I've already told you, makes you think about the planet. The planet as an object. The planet as an object of human impacts, but also the object of human governance. People start thinking during the 20th century, well, if we are now making all these impacts on the environment, on the planet, what can we do about it? Are there ways to deal with this? And yes, they started thinking about that in an ever more concerted way. Also, at about the same time, when the curve started going upwards after the war. And a very important word for that was precisely the environment. The environment was a word that was catapulted into stardom, you might say. It became very famous, important after the war. Before the Second World War, there was people used the word, but for different purposes. Environment became the name for all these ailments and problems that were running the world. Also, these are the radioisotopes that come from nuclear explosions. Also started, as we know, in 1945. The first ever explosion, nuclear explosion, was 16th of July 1945 in the Alamogordo Desert. The Americans blew the first bomb there. And then both Russians and Americans did their explosions in various places. These are actually the radioisotopes, how they traveled from the Pacific explosions that the Americans undertook. We're not interested in the radioisotopes today. We're interested in what happens when it is clearly visible how these travel around the world. The world itself, the globe as an entire object, is surfacing as something where we all are connected to each other. You blow a bomb somewhere far away in the Pacific Ocean, and the isotopes hit you in Japan, in Russia, in America, all over the place. And up in the left-hand corner, you can see a number of scientific works and projects conducted during the second half of the 20th century, all to suggest that we know more and more about the world, how it belongs together, how we belong together, how it works together, and how we need to take care of it. I wouldn't walk you through all the details in this large summary kind of image, but just to suggest to you that there is a community of scientists, the Earth System Science community, various programs and initiatives that assemble this knowledge. You also have a multiplicity of genres where they work. They present this in huge works of history, in concern reports from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change by the United Nations. the International Energy Agency, and many others put out these reports to tell you about the state of the world. You find popular science syntheses, and you also find films and other popular culture items to make us all aware of this. Nobody's masterminding or engineering this process. It is a broad, sweeping cultural and social process. And there are methods that the scientists use to present this new knowledge to us and to actually produce the knowledge. It all works together. And my point here is that what I've just been telling you in the last 10 minutes or so is indeed changing the way we see the world in a very fundamental way. It isn't the stable, safe world where we can sit in different parts of it and be safe there. We are not safe really anywhere because the changes are sweeping and global. And this hits the classroom. This is what I will tell you here. It is impossible to avoid now. Let's turn to the Great Transformation. This man is Carl Polanyi, a political theorist and historian and economic thinker who was working in the middle of the previous century. And he wrote a book that became very important. You see it here to the right. It's called The Great Transformation. He had a big idea when he investigated the breakthrough of the modern societies in the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries. He said, this is a new society economically with modern capitalism and later also modern socialism. It is a new society culturally. People's habits change. They dress differently. They read different kinds of books. New cultural products are all over the place. It is also a change in governance. We get various forms of parliamentarism and ultimately democracy. His point was that change comes in a sweeping way, broad, sweeping change in societies. Many argue, and I side with those, that the kind of change we will see, or at least require, to deal with the kind of changes I presented to you in the previous section here about the Anthropocene, will be also sweeping. And the words we use for this is, for example, transitions or transformations. Here are some people on an image from the UK at the at the Science Policy Research Institute at the University of Sussex, where they think about these things. An economist to the right who just moved to London to set up shop there, Mariana Mazzucato, has provided the economics of this. You find political scientists, you find historians talking about these things. Just a few names here. For example, Andy Sterling's talk about directionality. You want to get a direction for the change, not just get economic growth and let it take any direction. You need, if you want economic growth to sustain sustainability and solutions to the kinds of problems that we see in the Anthropocene, you must have some thinking about where you want to take it. So this is the transitions and transformations work is ongoing as we speak. There's a scientific literature coming out to suggest ways forward here. And when we, in the Climate Policy Council, talk about how to affect politics in Sweden, we of course look to this literature. We are part of it. We are part of setting up this new way of thinking. And there are many sophisticated ideas about how these transitions happen, with what frequency, if there is a cyclicity to them, as you can see on the right-hand side there. I wanted to show you this because also to signal that this is, of course, when it comes to the intellectual content, when it comes to the new ideas, you often find that in research institutes and in universities. But if you really look at who are involved in the change and who are affected by the change, they are everywhere. Every kind of social group is involved. And many people want this transition to happen. Trade unions, companies, indigenous communities. So there's a broad anchoring of this process as well. Sometimes we see the concept just transition also. It is about fairness, it is about distribution of resources, again about directionality. And this is something that is ongoing right now. In fact, I think it links very much to the geopolitical implications that I will come to at the end. Oh, this is hard to deal with. It doesn't respond very well, but let me get to the next picture here. We might need some new battery in this one, actually. Okay, so, well, I'm not only interested in Nobel laureates, but it just so happens that another Nobel laureate, namely the economist Amartya Sen, came up some years ago with the idea to build an international panel on social progress, not just about climate change, but social progress as well. Because he wanted us to rethink what progress means in our time. Last year, the first reports started to appear from this panel, rethinking society for the 21st century. I think this is a symptom of the kind of processes we're talking about here. We need to also rethink the basic concepts for social change. Universities also need to change. We live in an age of super complexity, as was argued some years ago by Ronald Barnett in papers that he wrote. And we need to deal with this super complexity. And here is how I see, if you take the same period that we talked about before, from the middle of the 20th century and onwards, I would like to divide that into a sequence of periods of how to use research in society. First, during the Cold War, it was very much geared to the military logic. Then that was followed by very much an industrial logic to provide research to spur economic development. We turned into the neoliberal globalization period, and there was a research policy for that as well, underscoring very much competitiveness and actually privileging the growth, the enormous growth in universities of economics, and not least business economics. We are now entering, since some years, a super complexity logic where universities need to adapt to that too. And I think that is what's going on in many respects when new programs are being formed. And the economic crisis in 2008 and 2009 spurred this development very, very decisively. So I think what we are getting at is new kinds of knowledge environments that will speak to this kind of demand for responsibility to be part of the transitions and the transformations in universities. So I have a few points here, or statements that I believe in. I think we can assume a profound shift in the forms of knowledge production that we see, and I think this is realistic. I think also there will be a need for the institutions to step forward here to carry those roles. And maybe also that some institutions are better than others in doing so. And that will be decisive, I think. These institutions will not look the same as they did in the previous century. And there will, I think, also be a shift from the organization of knowledge production to the environments themselves, to make them look different and be more collaborative. Time doesn't allow me to elaborate on this. This is something I'm very interested in, but I will need to move on. This is actually from my own home country, to show that some people actually are using universities as platforms. Here's actually a colleague in my own university, KTH, who has been really gaining a name in the past 4 or 5 years. He's an economist who has written 2 very important books about how to pursue the transition to a carbon-free society, using existing, not arguing for a revolution, but arguing for using actually existing economic and social institutions to do this. He's been very much respected for these books. So this again speaks to relations between climate and history. Climate, there has always been a climate. But climate is now, well, certainly not running the world, but it is affecting what we do in very deep ways. And it has gained very much in importance as an historical factor in recent years. So I think we should spend much more attention in historicizing climate, in thinking about what sort of effects climate has on the kind of decisions we are taking or not taking. Because if we're not taking them, we are creating more problems, of course. We should read this together. It's from a recent paper that some of us published in the leading journal in climate science called Climatic Change, where we argue for the use of history in thinking about climate. The history here, in this particular argument we have, is not so much about past climates, although these climate histories do play important roles, but about history as the social space where encounters take place and where new conditions for humans and societies and their companion species and their life worlds in natures and environments are unfolding and negotiated. It's a little bit philosophical, ponder about it, but it's an argument to suggest that there are many ways now that we will combine the climate governance issue with historical understanding. And I think it's going to grow tremendously in coming years. So let's finally turn to the domains of expertise that we need to do this. And here I will actually talk particularly about the role of the kinds of programs that Julia Laius is leading here at this particular university, namely where they actually use history very much and the humanities broadly speaking. And of course, we always start in this enthusiastic Paris meeting a few years ago when they reached this agreement to turn the world into a direction below 2 degrees. Again, if you look at the institutes, in this case the MIT, the famous University of Technology in Boston in the United States, go to their leaders and they argue that to actually achieve these kinds of goals, you need to be broad, you need to be interdisciplinary, you need to root your knowledge in culture, economics, and politics, not just technology, not just science. You need the whole range. Other reasons to think broadly about this is that when technology rules alone, like when this guy is stepping out and promising things he cannot deliver, things can go badly wrong, actually. I think he doesn't give everyone the power to share anything with anyone. He's a recipe for disaster. And other colleagues of his, coming from the IT business, they can quickly show that, and they can demonstrate that we live in a risky world. We shouldn't wear our rose-colored glasses anymore. And if you look here at another leading American university, what did they do when they got another $5 billion to spend? Well, they thought about new kinds of knowledge environments, new kinds of collaborations, joining, in this case, education, environment, human health, and international affairs, not setting up strict units for each discipline or just doing the traditional schools. There is much to do here. Integrative is a word I like very much. It came from biology and medicine, integrative biology, integrative medicine, but it's spreading now in many universities around the world. This is from Germany, where you see new programs taking place. If you go to the UK, you find units there where they also try to combine, often with a humanities focus, and reaching out with their new knowledge to the wider audience. This is from Cambridge in the UK. Similar things going on in Oxford. These are units that I've been taking a personal interest in and collaborated with. And also, if you go to the new literature about knowledge in the human sciences, you find a lot of new things cooking. Lots of combinations, for example, with emotions and affect, arguing for the value of humanities, and moving humanities knowledge into new areas. For example, in this case, Antarctica. Who could believe that the humanities could be relevant to Antarctica? There is new work on the history of humanities, very interesting, and arguments about why we need the humanities. We see reports coming out from many countries about the future of the humanities. This is the United States. One of the countries we should really look to today, I think, is Norway, where they have set up a totally new program for humanities knowledge from the government. And here is an initiative from Canada about how to transform graduate studies. There's a big discussion going on there about that. Here is actually a person I admire. I rarely do these things when I talk, but sometimes you hear people say important things, so important that actually you bring it to others. You may not know this guy. He's now actually the Vice Chancellor of Cambridge University. But here he is photographed when he was still the president of the University of British Columbia in Vancouver in Canada. His name is Stephen Toop. Stephen Toop, he's a legal scholar. International law is his field. I heard him more than 10 years ago, the first time. He was speaking on his own campus in Vancouver to a humanities congress with thousands of people actually in a super big hall. And here was this guy talking to all these humanists coming from all over Canada, North America, and even beyond. And we were, of course, by then we had heard many, many presidents talk. And we say, what can he tell us? And he said actually two things. We have two big problems. How we manage the environment and how we care to each other. Environment, and what do we say to each other? How do we talk about living together? Well, we are divided and we are angry with each other, particularly angry with religion. There is a hatred towards certain religions, particularly Islam, I think, these days. And he said, we cannot live in this world if those problems are not fixed. Then he said another thing. Point two, many people, when you're the president of a university, professors, even Nobel laureates come and knock my door and say they want new resources, they want new laboratories, they want to pursue their big ideas. And sometimes I can help them. That's my job, and I like to do that. And you're the humanists. You never come to knock my door. Where are your big ideas? Because you are the ones who can actually deal with the problems of environment and the problems of religion. If we cannot live together and stop hating each other, and if we cannot organize our societies differently so that we can deal with climate and environment, we will face big problems. You should come to me and knock my door and ask for the same kinds of resources, the new buildings, the new laboratories, whatever you need. And the humanists were first a little bit concerned. They never heard anybody say this before. Usually they hear the message, well, we don't have money for you. There is not enough resources. There are big problems in our university. We need to first think about other things to deal with. He took the different, rather the opposite position. And people, these were humanists, they were so shocked and after bewildered by what they heard that after a while they, me included, rose, hundreds of us, and started applauding this guy. So this was a strange appearance of a university president. That's why I'm going to say it. And I think 10 years ago, he was a little bit ahead of his time. He was suggesting something that I think is now very important. So I have now talked about these three major changes that I think is going on. The growth and emergence and growth of the Anthropocene Weltanschauung, as I call it. The necessity of a sweeping change for transition and transformation to deal with the problems that arise in the Anthropocene, and the widening needs, the needs for widening domains of expertise to deal with them, including all range of knowledge, including also the human sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. Now, finally, I'd just like to touch upon this issue of the geopolitical implications of the kind of human-Earth relationship that we see. Again, I'm going to take you back to my own campus. This is not an image from today. It is an image that is almost 100 years old, from around 1930. And you can all recognize this kind of social situation. What's going on here? If somebody arrived from Mars in a spaceship and said, what's going on here? How could you explain this? You say, this is very easy. You can say, this is a graduation ceremony in a university. Oh, well, the Martian would say, what's that? These people have studied for several years, and they are now going out to do what? To get high salaries for working in business and industry. Oh, the Martian would say, oh, now I see. So that's going on. And we all know how that works, don't we? That is very often why we are in universities in the first place. We want to get these jobs. We are here to train for a few years and to do this. There is nothing very complicated about it. And look at the question there. What sort of knowledge is involved here? Well, don't we know that too? We know precisely what is needed to get these jobs and keep the businesses going, to deal with the problems that businesses have, or even public administration. What sort of knowledge is needed to deal with this? And how do you get paid for it? 65 million people are refugees in the world today, and they will get more numerous with climate change. If we don't care to our societies and how they work, these kinds of problems will just grow and grow and grow. And universities, if I'm reasonably right in what I've argued before, need to deal with it. But they really don't know exactly how to do that. This situation is complicated. This situation here is not complicated. We need to move from here to there and think about how the knowledge we produce and use and share and the institutions that do that work with you as students and us as professors can deal with these kinds of issues. And it's very hard, but we need to do it simply. And I think we are actually doing it also. Some people, I'm back in the tar sands now in Canada, and you recognize this little guy here. He is actually running Canada now, Justin Trudeau. In his younger days, he was an active sportsman. He has many skills, actually, geographer, teacher, many other things. And there is Macron up there. They take on themselves to actually try to do it politically. Is it easy for them? No, it is not easy. They face big problems. People around the world don't believe, they don't trust elites running things in different ways. Because things have been going bad in the past. But we are in a moment where we need to take this kind of fight and to use knowledge to support the kind of responsibility we want to see. These are the images that the Anthropocene produced. Super big change. Plastics all over the place. Humans that run and rule the world, producing conflict also. These are the Trump voters up in the right-hand corner there. They want to continue digging coal and getting the fossil fuels out of the ground. Many people, not least young people and students, even school children, now led by the young girl Greta Thunberg from Stockholm, Sweden, inspiring other children and youth around Europe. They want to see it differently. They want to actually counter this. The population of Greenland is divided on the issue of uranium. Should it be dug out of the ground or not? Basically half and half. Half are against, half are for it. So resources, the kinds of things we saw in the hockey stick curves there, they also cut right into politics, right into how people think about change and future. So I think we're in a moment of where knowledge needs to take side and contribute to this change that is needed. And I would like to return to the ice. You saw the melting of the ice as one of the indicators of environmental change. Some colleagues of mine in Ontario, no, not Ontario, University of Oregon in the United States, a couple of years ago actually published an article in a leading geography journal about what they call feminist glaciology. I think this is interesting. People became mad. Feminist glaciology, how could you possibly think about such a thing? And they said, and also the National Science Foundation had funded it. Isn't that stupid? That's typical government mistakes, funding scientists who are just plain mad. But after a few weeks of discussion, many discovered that actually there was a point. Previous glaciology had often been white men standing on top of glaciers and being imperial and conquering the world. That was not the glaciology that was today's glaciology. Today's glaciology is about finding out more about ice that is melting as a sign of the Anthropocene. And very often now, it's both men and women doing that work, and with a totally different thinking about what they're doing and why. So with some discussion, and after an interview in Science by the lead author, things cleared up. And even those that had been protesting at first changed their mind. And people now understand glaciology much better than before. And you can go anywhere. You can go to northern Russia as well and find the same thing. See the sea ice melting. Actually, I visited the Arctic Museum of St. Petersburg yesterday. Fascinating stuff. Lots of ice to be seen there. But so far, too little, I would say, about the melting ice and about the climate change. That will come later, I suppose. So we see a changing, integrative, transforming humanities respond to this. We see, as on this image, how the human sciences are gathering together into new constellations. At Julia Laius' program, they study what they call the environmental humanities. We also have geo-humanities, we have energy humanities, we have medical humanities. We see also how humanities are gathering to deal with the digital world and the museums. I think this is decisive. It's a broad change of how humanities knowledge is conducted. And this is my final point here. This is linked to the changes I've been talking about before. It's not just because humanities practitioners have become so interested in collaborating. It's because that collaboration speaks back to the changes we've seen and I've talked about. So that is the kind of changes that you can see. They are inspired by the changes happening in the second half of the previous century, and they now orient themselves to search remedies, to search solutions, and be part of the change. And I will just quickly pass a few of the images here, just to finally return to my own university again. And one institution that I've been part of working with on these things for 6-7 years now, something that we call the KTH Environmental Humanities Laboratory. And here are some images of activities we've been involved in, films we have been producing, if I can get a brand new film about, particularly about South Africa, and various artistic activities, big conferences we've been organizing, both in Stockholm and in Italy and elsewhere. This is the head of the unit. His name is an Italian by the name of Marco Armiero. I want to tell you this and show you these little images just to tell you that I've been, as you can tell, in here for quite some time. I've been working in the universities for 30, 40 years, first as a student and for a long time as a professor. Things have been going pretty well, I think. I've been interested, I've been keen, I like my work and so on. But this is the most exciting things I've been involved in through my entire career. Really fascinating. Both good scholarly and also really engaging on a personal level. And I think also the people we meet are more diverse than they ever were before. So I take this as an indication that it's not only going to be necessary, it's also going to be fun. It's also going to be good work. And the Environmental Humanities Lab is very global, collaborating around the world with, despite its young age. And finally, speaking again about what Stephen Toop told us as the president, our own president has now also launched a new development plan for the next 5 to 6 years. And mind you, for the first time in the long history of this technical university, they are now, from the top level, launching the humanities and the social sciences and even the arts as part of the program for the future under the title of Leading KTH. And if I can only get the final slide here, you find these kinds of formulations. Humanities and social sciences are necessary for sustainable technological development. So, and you didn't see that kind of language before. So I'm reasonably hopeful. In a world full of problems that I've told you about, I really am inspired by hope. And on a day like this, when you are now looking at new programs you're going to be applying to, looking forward to maybe several years of hard study, I think this is a message that you can take with you and use as you navigate the new world you're entering, and that you, in only a few years, will be part of running. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we do not have much time left, but a couple of questions we could take. Yeah, have questions?
Here is a question.
Dear Professor, thank you very much for this tremendous lecture. I wonder, actually, I had fixed some points, and you see that there would be in our universe or whatever the super complexity logic of what is going on. But I wonder, what is the key problem or entire core of this super complexity? In other words, why is it so? And about the last but not least slide, what do you see as for the so-called foresight, let it be, perhaps new professions or new skill models for the future positions on the labor market? My name is Artem. I am the master student of the first year. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this question, which actually was a set of questions built into one package. I think you wanted to hear me say something about what was the most major concern here, the most major problem. And I think you've already heard me say this a little bit during the lecture. I think actually there are many big problems, but climate change is really a big one now. Because it somehow, if things go really bad with climate, it will affect so many other dimensions of human and social life on Earth. So that would probably be my number one problem. But having said that, I would also like to say something that I think we have learned from social science research now over many years, I would say last 20, 30 years really. And that is, speaks very much to Stephen Toop's points, that actually it's very much about how societies work together. If you want to achieve something in societies, you need civic spirit, you need some kind of trust in societies. Lots and lots of evidence about how societies simply work better on almost any dimension or score if only some elementary things are there. And trust is one of them, that you can actually rely on people. And that is easy to say. You can even say this is obvious. Do you need research to find this out, that you need trust? But yes, we do need this kind of research. We have now lots and lots of evidence to suggest that this is elementary. And this is very important also for democracy. Democracy, trust go together. And also what goes together with that is different groups in society, that they actually are not just envious or hostile to each other, which means that they cannot be, there must be something that glues societies together. And that's a very different kind of problem, you could say, or challenge than climate change. But I think I would like to say both, because I think they hang together in the way that if you don't have this trust, if you don't have societies that are somehow glued together, it's very hard to get legitimacy to deal with the kind of challenges that climate change represents. So, and that's again, I think, some of the, maybe a very basic thing for me when I argue that you need climatologists and historians and economics people so to work together, because these kinds of problems also are different. You say that we could say that climate is related to the natural sciences, trust is related to the social sciences, but they go together. The one problem cannot be dealt with without the other, and that's also why we need a collaboration in society. Your final thing about the labor market, well, I'm not a prophet. I cannot say precisely what the labor market's going to be, but I do think I know that over the long history, if you look back at history, you can always say that for those concerns that are major in a society, there will always be a need of competence. And that competence is actually going to be provided through the labor market. So just as we have seen a tremendous growth in economists, as I've said, in the past 30, 40 years, to deal with competitiveness and neoliberal changes, we will see, or at least I hope we will see, a need for those that are really taking social responsibility and the challenges of the Anthropocene seriously, and that being translated into also provisions in the labor market for competencies that can help solve that.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Yes, please.
Thank you. And I would also like to introduce myself first. My name is Katerina. I arrived from Kazan to here. And my program is Orientalism, but I'm also quite interested in what you were saying recently. And I have a following question. You've mentioned Sustainable Development Goals during your speech. Yes, and I've been an ambassador in my city for the 17th goal. So I'd like to know, do you have any experience introducing Sustainable Development Goals among the students and youngsters in your country? And this is my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. How excellent that you do this long trip to try and enter a program here, and also how excellent that you have been working with the sustainability goals in your previous activities. Now, well, yeah, I think actually when it comes to schools in Sweden, there is every school student will get to know something about the SDGs, clearly. So I think it's considered a little bit part of basic knowledge. They may not be able to say precisely immediately what SDG number 17 is, actually. Not many people do. It's like the directorates in Brussels. You say number 10 or 11 or 4 or something, and some people know exactly what it is. I never learn, really. I have to look it up all the time. But I'm roughly aware of what it means. But we do have a big discussion in our country as to the next step. Precisely how should these goals affect social planning and politics? And that is the process. The name for that process, as you know, is the Agenda 2030, to try to implement these towards the 2030 goal. The government has been talking about that quite a bit, but there's been quite little action so far. And I think now we've had not a shift in government, there's an election and a pretty protracted process of getting a new government in place. In fact, it ended with the same government as before after 4 months of deliberations. And I think they now, in their second term, in this constellation of the Social Democratic Party and the Greens, I think they want to move forward on the Agenda 2030. So I can now see how the government is sending signals to some of its public agencies to actually step forward. Only the other day I was in a conversation about this in the Innovation Agency, for example, because the Innovation Agency is among the agencies that should be charged with a very strong role in this. innovation must mean innovation now to suggest moving in the right direction in terms of the Agenda 2030. But they don't have the culture for that. They have been doing other things for a long time. They've been thinking primarily about economic growth and Swedish industry and to promote that. And how do you combine that old role and thinking with moving into Agenda 2030? They need to learn internally, and that takes time and it takes effort, and some people maybe should do other things for a while, and new people have to come in. So it doesn't come easily. I think it's one of the signs of the sweeping transitions that we will see here is that, yes, it will happen. I think, though, in an international comparison, that my country is pretty well off on this development. The government I think they believe they failed, actually, in the previous 4 years. I think they want to improve, but compared to other countries, I think it's still pretty okay.
Thank you very much. We need to finish. Thank you again.